Father, we thank you for this gathering together. We ask that you watch over us and bless us in this study and open our eyes and our ears to know and understand your word. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. I want to start out with the prophecy. If we're going to study Bible prophecy, let's start with one of the greatest ones of all. This is a point in the book where what has been seen by the reader is that there are a number of prophecies, and we looked into them deeply and found them deeply veiled in mystery. But we did see the lineage of the Messiah, which is defined in two places in the Bible, at the very beginning of the New Testament, and one describes his place as being the son of Abraham, and the other one describes his place. It gives a direct lineage of the Messiah to being of the line of Abraham, son of Abraham, and of the lineage of David, among others. The other one defines his tracing himself back to being a son of Adam. Adam in Hebrew meaning man, if I remember correctly, and which is why he called himself in a number of places Son of Man, meaning son of Adam. So this particular prophecy deals with the time of his coming, and it sets him apart from the likes of Joseph Smith of the Mormon Church and Muhammad of the Islamic faith, and a number of other kooks who have been along the years claiming to be either the prophet or a prophet of the same ilk as Jesus. It also looked into the idea that he was called by name 500 years before he arrived on the scene. Then there are certain prophecies that prove his divine nature. The Lord has said that he will not share his glory with another, and yet he did with Jesus. So the only way that could happen is if Jesus were divine himself. So this is the point of a prophecy that tells exactly when he would come. And it was at this time, in that very Bible that I sent to Bo, that I realized that Bible prophecy and the Bible were something far greater than a collection of stories that had been given down to us. And the reason you come up with this idea is that's what you're taught from the very beginning of the time you start in public school. Now, you guys wouldn't know it that much because you've never been in public school. You've always been in a Christian school. And, well, Tracy, you've been in public school, but it's just completely different there today, because public school today is the religion of the name escapes me. I'm not quite with it this morning, of evolution. And that, in turn, is the religion of the humanists. And that, in turn, is the religion of atheism. So they treat the universe as if that were of the same ilk as God himself. At the time that this prophecy was given, and this is the prophecy of Daniel's 70 weeks. If you want to turn and look at it in your Bible, go to Daniel 9:24.
That's Wrapped in stone.
Now, at the time this prophecy was given, the children of Israel had been in captivity in Babylon for some 70 years. And I say in Babylon, that's technically not true. When they went into captivity was at the very death of Josiah and their subjugation to the Pharaoh. I think it was Necho, who was going through to go up to fight the Babylonians on the Euphrates River. He told Josiah not to come out. Josiah did, and he was killed. And it was at that time that the very first beginning of the subjugation of Israel began. So that prophecy of the subjugation of Israel to be in captivity for 70 years, it ended up in Babylon, but it started out in subjugation to Egypt. It was at that time they were put under 100 talents of silver, I think it was, to the king of Egypt, annually. So at this time, it was starting to near the end of the 70-year period. Among the Israelites in the gang was the prophet Daniel, and he had been taken to Babylon with the first captives of Israel. It was about, as I recall, about 50 years before. I have this all laid out in a timeline that I'm not ready to publish yet, but I can go back and check it and look at it, although it didn't seem to be necessary for this study. Now, apparently, Daniel had been reading Jeremiah's prophecy, and he understood that it was time for, it was his prophecy about the 70 years of captivity, and it was time for Israel to be delivered. And so he had gone to the Lord to ask him for further details so he would know exactly when the deliverance was going to come. And that would be in Daniel 9, 1 through 20, which is just the 20 verses leading up to what we're fixing to read. In response to his prayers, the Lord sent his angel Gabriel to tell Daniel the things that would come to pass with the coming of the Messiah and the end of evil in the world. And that would be in Daniel 9, 21 through 24. Gabriel had come and told Daniel exactly what he was there for. One of the other things that he said was he had been in conflict with the prince of Greece, or Persia, I can't remember which, but this was during the time of a great clash between the Greeks and the Persians. Of course, I'm sorry, it was, there was a clash, but it hadn't come to the Bible yet.
You want this Bible, John?
No, I got it right here. And so Gabriel had come to tell Daniel of the things that would come to pass, and particularly with the coming of the Messiah and the end of evil in the world. So if you read Daniel 9, 24 through 27, which you can start reading right now. Have you guys finished reading it?
Yeah.
Okay. There's no sense in me reading it to you. You can read it 5 times faster than I can read it to you, so. In this, it talks about weeks. And what happens is, in all the prophecies that have to do with the cosmic struggle between good and evil, which is kind of where we start out in the Bible, we do find out as continuing revelation goes along, we find out more and more and more about this struggle. But basically, Paul said it all when he said these are against evil in high places. It's what the battle's about. It's a spiritual war. And if you don't believe it, just ask what happened this morning and last week when we tried to gather and get together for a Bible study. Hopefully that we can develop into something that you could invite to someone who wouldn't feel like they were having to get dressed and go to church and all of that. Okay, looking at the passage, we see 70 weeks. Now, the words translated here as weeks, they come in several different forms in King James. Shabua, Shabua, and Shebuah. And if you take the words literally in various tenses and whatnot, what they mean is sevened. Sevened. S-E-V-E-N-E-D. So that's a verb form past tense. The words occur 19 times in 16 verses of the Old Testament. And they can mean a seven, as they are translated into KJV, or King James, I'll call it. They can mean a 7 of days or a 7 of years. A 7 of days, as in Leviticus 12:5, Deuteronomy 16:9, etc. Or a 7 of years, as in Genesis 29:27 through 28. In this particular instance, most scholars take this to mean a 7 of years, and as we get into this, I think we'll see that this is exactly, no, we won't just see it, we will prove that this is exactly what it means. So the prophecy says that from the time of the commandment to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, the Lord has said that there'll be 70 weeks allowed on Jerusalem and the children of Israel to accomplish the following. 1, to bring the Messiah. 2, to finish the transgression of all mankind, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Now, you'll go back in there and you can see every one of those points, just as I said them, are laid out in the prophecy. So what we're dealing with is a time of the end when the end of all sins and the end of all transgression of mankind is brought to a close. Obviously, the setting up of the everlasting kingdom. In this time frame, this 70-week time frame, it's to make a reconciliation of iniquity, which came with the Messiah, to bring up in the everlasting prophecy, seal up the vision and the prophecy. Now, we're talking about bringing the Bible to its logical conclusion and to anoint the most holy. Now, if you don't understand what that means, the most holy was not anointed until that great service in the book of Revelation that took place in heaven. You recall the congregation was sitting around waiting for something to happen. Nothing was going on, but they were standing before the throne. And then the Lamb shows up and takes his seat on the throne of the Most High. Now, for those like the Jehovah's Witnesses, and perhaps the Mormons, I don't really remember what they think. Certainly the Islamics don't think this. It is clear if Jesus sat on the throne of the Most High God, then he has to be one with the Most High God. That's irrefutable. Or you got to change the Bible, one of the two. Okay. Now, if we take the 70-week period and understand it's 70 sevens, and the sevens are years, then we're looking at 70 years to do all this. But we should also note that the 70 years is not run together. There is 69 weeks, or 69 sevens of years, until the coming of the Messiah. And then he'll be cut off, but it won't be for anything that he's done. Cut off meaning killed. So this logically brings about a question. When was the beginning of the time periods? And the first was, when is the beginning of the 69 weeks, which is part of the 70 weeks? What we didn't know is that to date, about 2,000 years between the end of the 69th week and the beginning of the 70th week has occurred. And still the temple's not rebuilt. Now, Israel came back into the hands of the Jews in May of 1948. And the temple has sat there, and indeed the second most holy shrine in all of Islam sits on the top of that temple. So we know that this came about. That's my fax ringing. We know that this came about at the time of the commandment to... Let me go back and read it. From the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks. The street shall build again, and the wall, even in troublous times. So the street gets rebuilt, and the wall, along with the rebuilding of the temple. Now, there were 4 commandments in the Bible that came forth to do this, that had to do with this subject here. The first was in the first year of Cyrus the Great of Persia, and actually not within the first year of Cyrus the Great. Cyrus the Great had already been on the throne when he took Jerusalem, which, by the way, was 70 years to the day after the event that started the subjugation. This is it comes about in Ezra 1:1, and the temple vessels that were taken by Nebuchadnezzar were returned to Jerusalem. That's Ezra 1:2 through 11. Okay, well, obviously the commandment marked the end of the captivity, because that's what the prophecy says. And so the return of the first of Jews began, but it ceased during the time of Artaxerxes because of certain accusations by the resident Gentiles, Gentile peoples that surrounded by Jerusalem. And that would be in Ezra 1 through 4 if you want to read the account of it. An important thing about understanding Bible prophecy is you have to know the history of what went on at the various times. Otherwise, it's not going to be clear to you as to exactly what's going on. So, back to the story. The work was in stasis until the second year of the reign of Darius the Great. That was 589 to 486 BC. 589 to 486 BC. And this is Darius the Great of Persia. And what happens is the activities of some of the Jews caused the records to be searched for the original decree of Cyrus. And when the decree resurfaced, the command went forth by Darius to begin work again. That's in Ezra 3 through 6. Now, you got to understand that a commandment of the Persian could not be undone because they thought it came from God himself. So that was a Persian law, which is something that got Daniel thrown in the lion's den, if I remember correctly. But anyway, when the decree resurfaced, the command went forth from Darius to begin work again, and the temple was finished in the 6th year of the reign of Darius, Ezra 6:15. Now, one of the things you want to remember as we go along, I'm going to give you the references, and it's probably something you ought to write down, for the simple reason that some of these one-sentence facts may have taken me 2 weeks to establish to be able to know that one fact sentence. And in order to know exactly what happens, you have to be able to go back to the scripture. And sometimes that takes a long time to track down. So you might want to take notes as we go along as to what the point was and where you can find it for yourself in case you need to go back and research it. And the first time you try to tell somebody some of this stuff, you will have to go back because they're going to quote some crap that in many cases they actually are really bad scholars, or they've been told something by some preacher somewhere that they just can't possibly. It's just not documented. In fact, preachers never document what they say, it seems. Let's see here. That reference to Darius the First, by the way, came from Wikipedia. And I think that's the only site that I need to give you right now. Site meaning CITE, citation. All right, let's see here. So right now we've had 2 decrees, and some people would say that one of the 2 of them had to be the decree, but since the passage clearly says that the street shall be built again and the wall even in troublous times, we know from Nehemiah that the rest of the city remained in a shambles. And so it's fairly obvious that neither of these commandments are what we're looking for. A third commandment went forth in the days of Artaxerxes, but this had to do with an endowment for the reinstatement of temple services. That's Ezra 7, and part of the reference is missing here, but it's got a -10. So not sure exactly what it is, but you can read that there. But this is not the commandment. It doesn't have to do with the rebuilding of the temple and the wall. The one we're looking for came on Kodesh. That's Hebrew, CHODESH. And by the way, you can download online, or I could send it to you if you want me to. The latest version I have is Quick Verse 2010, and it's fairly good. It it's like the typical quick verse. Since quick verse 4, none of them would fit together like they should, but it's adequate, and you can do a search and so forth and so on. The other thing you're looking for is the interlinear Strong's Greek and Hebrew to King James Version, and in there you can see the word that's in the Hebrew or Greek text, and you can click on that word and it'll take you to the definition of it, and then you can get a real good idea of what it's saying. The other thing you should know as you study Bible prophecy is the Bible is self-interpreting. When you get into some of these figures of speech that you find in the Bible, you'll find that they are highly sophisticated. I know of no writing that even comes close. And I've read a lot of Shakespeare and so forth and so on. Rhetoricians today use these figures of speech, metonymy and amorism and various things, merism, but you guys have even studied some of them. You've studied the figures of speech that have to do with simile and with
Allegory.
what's the other one?
Chris says allegory.
What?
Allegory.
Allegory is not one of the. One of them is metaphor. Simile is you are like a dog.
Right.
And metaphor is you're a dog. Allegory it uses a different format, and it's highly speculative. It's something that I like to stay away from if I can. But there's at least one case in the Bible where Paul clearly calls a figure of speech allegory, and he likens that to Hagar and her. He says this is an allegory. So anyway, I don't know where the reference is. It's New Testament, but if you had Quick Verse 10 on your computer, you could just type it in and find it right there in the Bible, which is something I do all the time. Okay, back to the commandment. It came on Kodesh, which in Hebrew that means specifically the new moon. By either metonymy or synecdoche, which are two figures of speech. Metonymy deals between two nouns, and it comes down like this. It's like metonymy. The cause is where the cause is put for the effect. And for instance, somebody says, we were flooded, which is put for the effect of what happened to the flood. That's the act of flooding, past tense, flooded. Okay, but it could be put for the effect of what happened, and that is the devastation that you see around you. It was a flood. Okay, now devastation is not the flood, it's what happened. That would be metonymy of the cause. Synecdoche deals with two different ideas, which sometimes the cause is put for the effect is put for the cause, and there's generally speaking 4 of them in the reference that I use, but I'm sure that for as many rhetoricians as you've got out there, there's that many ideas about exactly what to call it. But anyway, you get the picture, the gist of the biblical figures that we're looking at here. So it came on Kodesh Nisan. That's the first month of the Jewish year, called Abib in the Exodus account. That was the ancient name of it, but as a result of the Babylonian captivity, it came to be called Nisan, from the Chaldee Nisanu. And this commandment came in the 20th year of the reign of Artaxerxes the Great, which is Nehemiah 2:1-8. And it was on this day that the king gave Nehemiah the charge to go forth and rebuild the city and the wall. Now, easy enough, right? Wrong. And I'm going to give you 4 examples, and it's going to take me a second here as we go along to ferret each one out. But I'm going to tell you who the guys are that came forth with the idea, and you'll see they are no slouches when it comes to scholarship. They are not idiots, and they are well versed in science and criminology and the Bible. So you got to stop and listen to a guy who's really smart. In fact, maybe smarter than you are. If you see that guy, maybe you got to stop and listen to him. So let's see here. Along the lines, these guys will talk about the actual length of the time period in the 70 weeks, and they'll talk about exactly when they end and the various dates associated with the prophecy and the fulfillment. So in a lot of what you have here, you're dealing with BS. One of the examples I use is the idea of exactly who the king of the Exodus was. And I can show you about, I don't know, 13 or 15 different ideas of people who just matter-of-factly state that this is when it happened, or who the Pharaoh was, or whatever. And if you assume that one is correct, and just pick one, I don't care, this means that 95% of what else you read about it is BS. If that one's correct, that you picked, and it doesn't make any difference, 95% of what you read about it is BS. And for your information, BS means bovine scatologica. It's not what you think. It is. It's exactly what you think, but that's not what BS means in this context. It means bovine scatologica. Look it up.
Cow crap.
Let's see. Okay, in all of this, we have the argument about the date of the Passover, of the crucifixion. Okay, and that's one of the examples I'm going to take. We're going to look at just quickly, and I'm not going to give you the details. The details are in the book, and it's highly footnoted, so you can go back and read the source documents for yourself. Because, frankly, I can't stand some preacher that comes around and spouts off a bunch of BS, and he's got no accounting for where his information comes from. I really don't care what you or he or they think about the Bible. What I want to know is, what does it say? What did the Lord say? And I'll make my own decisions. So let's look at the first guy. This is a guy named Newton, namely Sir Isaac Newton, and I'm sure you know who he is. This is from a book called Newton's Date for the Crucifixion by John P. Pratt. In the Journal of the Royal Astronomical Society, Volume 32, September 91, pages 301 through 304. And you can search that down if you want to. It's probably fruitless, but I have it downloaded in my library in case I need to go back to it. Newton says that the Passover came on a Friday, the 14th of Nisan of 34 AD. Friday, the 14th of Nisan in 34 AD. This was either Wednesday, March 21st, or Thursday, April 22nd, Julian. In this, the Julian calendar was established by Julius Caesar, 44 BC or so, as I recall. And he got it from this chick that he was running with at the time named Cleopatra, who brought it when she came with him from Egypt. Then we got a guy named Honer, Hoehner. And this guy is Harold Honer, a well-known author and distinguished professor of New Testament studies at Dallas Theological Seminary. And exactly when that was, it probably, I think these notes were originally written about 30 years ago, but it could have been, the date of this file is 09. So, this guy Honer, he says, let me see, I've lost it. Okay, he makes a supposedly airtight case for Friday, Nisan 14, 33 AD, which was April 3rd of 33 AD, Julian. Then we got another guy named Anderson, and I'm sure you all know exactly who this guy is. He was the lead detective for Scotland Yard in a rather famous little case called Jack the Ripper. So, sometimes even the guys that write this stuff, you kind of need to know who they are. He was later knighted, became Sir Robert Anderson, and he wrote Christ in the Lion's Den and a few others, not the least of which is a book called The Coming Prince. You can find that online, and you can download the entirety of it. I can say that just until a few years ago, you couldn't even find a copy of it in the United States. At least when I searched through lending libraries, you couldn't. There was another book that I use also, Chronicles of Chaldean Kings.
He wrote?
Now, this is by a guy named D.J. Wiseman.
Oh.
What it is the Babylonian Chronicle, and in it you can find exactly when the great figure was raised by Nebuchadnezzar. It's fairly obvious. But anyway, that's off the line of the story, but along the same lines, I looked for that book for, I was probably looking for it around 1980 because I asked a professor of Old Testament at Luther Rice, who was in my Sunday school class, and he wanted to know why I would need that book. I finally got a copy of it about 7 or 8 years ago, but I even wrote to the British Museum to try to get a copy, and they wouldn't even return my email. And I had the local library here in Pensacola check. There was not a copy of it in any lending library east or west of the Mississippi. So you can see that the ability of research with the coming of the information superhighway, particularly in the way we know it today, has dramatically increased knowledge, just like it says in the book of Daniel. Anyway, Anderson says that, let me see, what does Anderson say? It was on Thursday, April 10th of 32 AD, Julian. Okay, and then there's another guy called Pickle, and he takes some cross-dated references from contracts and so forth and so on. And he does a fairly good job of documentation, and he comes to the conclusion that Passover was possible on any number of days in the spring of 31 AD. Now, you can see pretty good scholars, Isaac Newton, Robert Anderson, the head of New Testament studies, or I don't know if he was the head or not, but a big player in New Testament studies at Dallas Theological Seminary. I mean, these aren't exactly lightweights. But at the end of it all, what do we know from their writings? Well, not much. What we know for sure is they're in conflict. But what we don't know for sure is the Julian or Gregorian calendar that the time period began, and we don't know the Julian or Gregorian calendar that the time period ended, and we don't know the Julian or Gregorian calendar dates for most of the events associated with the time period. So, my theory in all of this is if there's conflict and you can't possibly know what they're saying, then let's step back and look at what we do know and see if we can draw some conclusions on our own. So, if we go back, according to Anderson, Xerxes was the father of Artaxerxes, and he was murdered by Artabanus in July of 465 BC. Artabanus put Artaxerxes on the throne in February of 464 BC. Now, we pretty much know that. So in February of 464 BC, Artaxerxes acceded to the throne. That's according to Anderson. Honer says that he died shortly after December 17th of 465 BC, and that Artaxerxes immediately succeeded him. Well, wait a minute. Do we know then that what Anderson said is true? Well, apparently not. We've got them a year apart. And he also says Artaxerxes immediately succeeded Xerxes. Then Hunter says that since the accession system was used, and since the old Persian calendar ran from Nisan to Nisan, Artaxerxes acceded to the throne in 464 BC. So, what you have here is difference. Now, I'll tell you this. Certainly in Babylon, and perhaps in the Persian calendar, and I don't really remember, although I've studied it, I just don't remember. But there was an accession system. And so let's take the case of John F. Kennedy. Lyndon Johnson followed him on the throne of America, and that's what it has become today, according to this idiot in office. But that's political, and we should probably stay out of that. But anyway, Lyndon Johnson acceded on November 22nd, 1963, if I recall correctly. And that was, okay, November 22nd. So what if it was 1963, and I'm pretty sure that it was, could have been 64, I don't know. But if he did succeed to the presidency, his first year began in November 22nd, right? Well, actually not. His first year began January the 1st. And because that's how you reign, how you count years of someone, unless you for sure know the date of succession. So what happens is, in years that ran from Nisan to Nisan, or that's the first month, or in the case of the Jews, from Tishri to Tishri, which is the 7th month. And that 7th month historically is the date of the month of creation, and also the I think it was the month of creation. But the way I see it, it has to be also the month of the second coming. So in spite of those that say that we don't know the time and the date, well, yeah, we don't know the time, but when it comes, we will know it pretty closely, as a matter of fact. So what we have here is different ideas about when they should date the reign. My personal preference is 464, and this leaves the 20th year of Artaxerxes. It's fairly simple. 464 plus 20 years gives us 444. Now remember, we're counting backwards in BC, not forward. So a little hard for some, but okay. So
Mom says Dad used to get all frustrated when grandmother then had to go get coffee or
all right. I'm leaving part of this idea and part of this out because it gets into detail that, although it's in the book and it needs to be in the book, your brain is just going to go flat on it. What we have, if we look at the Jewish calendar, and we look at the timing, it demands that Nehemiah must have been using a Tishri to Tishri calendar rather than a Nisan to Nisan calendar. Now, that's what Anderson thought was Nisan to Nisan, but it just doesn't work. Let's see. The fact of the matter is that the dates of the reigns of Judean kings were always determined using the Tishri to Tishri civil calendar. That's referred to back in the giving of the law as the beginning of the year, the month Tishri, which is the day of trumpets is the first day, the 10th day is the Day of Atonement, and the 15th through the 22nd day is the Feast of Tabernacles. And the Feast of Tabernacles is something that we will all celebrate through eternity.
What is this Tishri calendar?
Well, it's the civil calendar, and in the civil calendar, the first month of the year is the month Tishri. That, as a matter of fact, has always been the calendar, even since the days of Moses. Not Moses, since the days of Noah. In the time of Moses, Ezekiel 10, I think it is, the Lord told Moses that this will be the first month to you. This was at the time of the new moon on the first day of Nisan, which was originally the 7th month. Today is the first month in the Jewish calendar. So, has everybody caught that?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm reading now. All right, so what I assume is, and later on, there's some other fairly strong indications that this is when it had to be. But the year of accession, okay, so we saw that it happened sometime in, did I say December?
I don't think you said
Whatever,
a month,
but
you said
it
460.
didn't become his first year until the beginning of his first year in office by their calendar, which would have been Tishri. They had another name for it, by the way. The Persians did, but I've used the Jewish calendar. So the 20th year of his reign must have fallen in 444 BC. Now, as it turns out, in these various calendars, the dates are all over creation. I mean, we can't, we just can't lay down what the exact dates were. But there is one date that we can lay down very clearly, and that's the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. Now, why would we want to know that? Well, because that's when a very important event in Jesus' life happened. Now, in Roman records, we know that Augustus Caesar died on August 19th of 14 AD, and the Roman Senate convened on September 18th to vote the various titles of the throne on his son Tiberius. Now, you got to understand, this titles business was an ongoing thing where Augustus was declared first citizen, and then yada yada, and then something else, until he became emperor, and then later a god. So, so these titles were conveyed by the Roman Senate from Augustus to Titus. Now, okay, this leaves us the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar, from August 19th or September 18th of 28 AD to August 19th or September 18th of 29 AD, about a month period. So we don't know exactly when the Bible, when it meant that, but it did tell us that this happened in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. Now, why is the date important? Well, it was this time that John the Baptist came to preach in the wilderness of Judea. That's Luke 3, 1 through 3. Now, we know that John the Baptist was 6 months older than Jesus. It's in Luke 1, 30 through 36. His preaching was to prepare the way for the Lord. That's in Luke 3, 4 through 6. And this fulfilled Isaiah's prophecy of the voice calling from the wilderness for men to witness the glory of the Lord come to the earth. And that's in Isaiah 43 through 5. Now, one of the reasons I really, really like to use the book of Isaiah as a reference for Bible prophecy when I see it fulfilled is that the book of Isaiah is part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And when they were translated, we find out that what we have in the Bible and the manuscript that King James came from is exactly the same, with the exception of a few words, very few, or phrases, none of which make any material change to the book or to what it says. So what happens is we have something that we can date back to roughly 170, 180 BC. But, maybe 150 even. But what happens is, that's archaeologically hard dated. In order for that to have been canon at the time, it had to have been at least 200 years old. So what we have is a book that's dated back to 350 BC, or a little later, earlier maybe. And that means that in this testimony that we have an accurate record of, highly accurate record of, we have real prophecies written down 300 to 400 years before they came to pass. Now, by any stretch of the imagination, you got to understand, these prophecies are not like the prophecies of Nostradamus and others of his ilk. Nostradamus, and most people haven't read his prophecies, but I have, and his prophecies are written in quatrains, which means it's 4 lines, and they're absolutely nebulous. They could mean anything.
Exactly.
Bible prophecies are way different. They're highly explicit, sometimes highly figurative, and in many cases they cannot possibly be understood, even by the guy that wrote them, until we get further revelation. So, Bible prophecies are way different than this stuff you see by Bishop Casey and that those kind of guys. So, anyway, back to what was going on.
Edgar Casey or something.
We're told that at that time, that Jesus began to be about 30 years of age, and he began, that's Luke 3:23. And after being baptized by John, he started to call his disciples. That's John 1. Let's see. Well, the first thing that he did was this feast that happened on the 3rd day. That's Tuesday, and this was the miracle of the wine at the wedding feast. Now, I don't have the exact reference because it's not part of these notes, but this miracle, you'll recall, was the fulfillment of the biblical prophecy that when the Messiah came, he would feed his people with wines on the lees in the mountains of Israel. This is called the miracle at Cana, and if you recall, is where he turned the water to wine at the wedding feast. And Cana is in the mountains of Israel, in the north, in Galilee of the nations, or of the Gentiles. And the wines on the lees, that means wine that is so good that it's drunk down to the lees being the leavings in the bottle of a natural bottle of wine. And they're the dregs, what we call. And usually that's poured out, dumped, because it's not good. But this was wines that were so good that they drank it down to the lees. And clearly that's what the New Testament record of this says, is that's what he did. He turned the water to wine that was so good that people were saying, why did you give the worst wine first and the best wine last? Which is a cocktail party trick, you'll recall. You always serve the good stuff first, and when you can't taste it anymore, you serve them the rot gun. So what happens after that is that Jesus went to observe the Passover in Jerusalem. Now, I won't get into that just yet, exactly what he did at that Passover. It's highly fascinating, but that was required by the law. And you may recall this from previous studies that we've had, or from studies that you've done. But there were 3 days in the Jewish calendar where all men of Israel had to appear before the Lord. Anybody know what they are?
No.
Not offhand, no.
Okay. They're the Passover. They're the Feast of Weeks, which is Pentecost. And they're the Feast of Tabernacles, which comes, like I said, in the 7th month. Feast of Weeks comes on the day after the Sabbath of Passover week, 50 days after that. Penta meaning 5 for 50. I don't remember what cost means, but it means the 50 days. Okay.
50 days after which?
Now, there's an argument out there about exactly when all this happened. And you can go through all that brain damage, and I'm sure that everybody sits there when I go through what Honer said and what Anderson said and what Newton said and yada yada. And it's like, why do I care what those guys think? Well, that's pretty much what goes on in the argument about what year this was. Although I think it's important, you can't get much out of the argument other than the fact that these guys don't know what they're saying. So, because of the argument. But if we look at what the Bible says, the book of John gives us 3 Passovers. The first, which was we've already mentioned, a second one in John 6:4, and the one that comes just after the miracle of John 6:1 through 14, which is the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. Oh, I'm sorry. A second was the. I said that wrong. The second was the 5 loaves and 2 fishes, John 6:1 through 14. And the third one was the one at which he was slain. That's John 11 and 12. So, what we know is the time period from his baptism until his death, it included the time of his ministry. It was at least 2 years, and it was the time just before the first Passover. So, if you follow what I'm saying, is there was a first Passover, then a year later there was a second Passover, then a year later, which gives us 1 year, and a year later there was a third Passover, which gives us a ministry of 2 years, plus the time before the first Passover. So if we take the biblical record alone and use the possible dates for the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar, the Passover, this last Passover, is the date of the crucifixion, and it was 31 AD, which would be 29 AD plus 2 years, and the Passover of 34 AD, which is plus 4 years. So you can't go outside of those dates. So
he's gonna stop reading to us and start telling us about it. He's not explaining it very well
today.
I know. It's his first time on. He's trying to.
all right. It took me a minute to strain out stuff that I had already said. What we have, if we if we could identify the date for the beginning of the prophecy and a date for the end, we'd have a pretty good calculation, a pretty simple calculation for the layout of the coming of the Messiah. But the problem is that okay, if we took the earliest of these and the 49 years and 436 years, it says from the time of the commandment to the coming of the Messiah is 7 weeks, 62 weeks. So that's 49 years, or 7 times 7 years is 49 years, and 436 years for a total of 483 years. And if we took the earliest of the dates of 445 BC and added 433 years, that would be minus 445 plus 483 equals 38. But the problem is the Messiah didn't come in 38 AD. He came before that. So immediately there's those guys out there that say that, well, here we have an obvious and proven error in the Bible, or a prophecy that didn't come to pass. But if you step back and look at it, well, that's just not the way that it is. If we go back and what we see in most Bibles is a time frame that's laid out in years, and the years include the 4 kingdoms that would rule over Israel. And that is up until the time of the establishment of the everlasting kingdom. Now, you can read about this in Daniel 7 and the establishment of the everlasting kingdom in Daniel 12 through 14. I'm sorry, Daniel 7, 12 through 14. Now, what we have is a time when 4 beasts rise up out of the sea. And that's that prophecy that starts out Daniel 7. And the 4th beast was dreadful and terrible, and it had 10 horns, and from among the 10 horns arose a little horn, in which he saw the eyes of a man who spoke great things. That's Daniel 7, 7 and 8. This horn spoke great words against the Most High and afflicted, and in King James, that's wore out the saints. He made war with the saints, that's Daniel 7:21, and prevailed against them until the Ancient of Days came, and the kingdom was given over to them. That's Daniel 7:22. Now, obviously, we see a parting of the time periods in the 70 weeks, because the Messiah came and he was cut off just like it says, but this is talking about a time when the everlasting kingdom is set up. So there's just a little thing that was thrown in here that we didn't know about, and that is 2,000 years of time.
Right.
Not accounted for in the prophecy, but certainly the prophecy goes from the beginning of the commandment to the setting up of the everlasting kingdom. So what we find out here is when we study Bible prophecy, sometimes you think you know what it says, but if you take everything into context, you find out that you didn't know by 2,000 years or so exactly what it was saying. So it's something you should put in your book of tricks, that as you study Bible prophecy, keep in mind, more revelation may come along that changes what you thought you knew. And today, as it sits, I can guarantee you that beginning with C.I. Scofield in the Scofield Bible, the science of Bible prophecy has been hijacked by a great number of expositors who are really, really true blue Christian guys, and they're really smart guys. But they've been led down the path by beginning with Scofield, like I said. Scofield has an ability at times to make more cubic feet of logic mistakes or cubic mistakes than anybody I've ever seen. It's just incredible. He forces his logic sometimes, and sometimes he just jumps into something and assumes it to be true, when in fact it's simply not. So what happens is, when you do Bible prophecy, you have to sit back and read the Bible for what it says. And this means that you need accurate cross-references. There was supposed to have been a book with that Bible called The Treasury of Scripture Knowledge. It's a hard copy, and I've carried it with me on every airline trip, right alongside the Bible in my briefcase. I'll send it to you because it's something you need. But you can get the same thing from a Quick Verse. Quick Verse 10 for sure has it. It first came out after a conversation that I had with a salesman. And I told him it's something they need to put in there, and they did, because they could get it for nothing. So anyway, so we've gone over the prophecy of what Daniel saw in the prophecy about the time of the setting up of the everlasting kingdom, namely a war for the saints. The saints are beaten in the war, and the kingdom was given over to this guy, this 11th horn, that we call Antichrist. Let me see. It was given over to him for a time, times, and a dividing of time. That's Daniel 7:25. And the word translated here as time and also times is Edom, and it means a set time. That's all it means. Let's see, it's a Chaldee word. It occurs some 13 times in 11 verses of the Old Testament, and these are all in the book of Daniel. And this because Daniel is largely written in Chaldee. It's taken by most scholars to mean a year, and from other references to this same time, times, and a half a time, we know that we're told that it's 360 months, and it's 3.5 years. So there could be no question in the Bible as to what it means in the book of Daniel. All right. If we go and we look at this in the Apocalypse, and that's the Greek word for the book of Revelation. Apocalypse means revelation. So, and if you go look at the text in Greek, that's what the title of the book is. The Apocalypse, I think, of John, but I don't recall exactly. It's been a while since I've studied it. The time at which the little horn comes to speak these great things corresponds with the time of the two beasts of the Apocalypse. They arise at the time of the end. This is Revelation 13 now. You might want to flip over to 13 and keep a bookmark back at Daniel. Don't know. the last half of this time, they arise at the time of the end, and this is the time of the last 7 years of this these 70 weeks. So if 7 years is a week, this is the last year. We've already talked about the 69 weeks. Now this is the 70th week, or the last 7 years of the planet. Now, if you go back and you study much Bible prophecy from very many of these modern day expositors, some of whom actually call themselves prophets, but they're not, you will find that they call this time frame the tribulation. But really and truly, when you study the apocalypse, you'll see that the tribulation, the great, is, I can't remember exactly where it comes, but that's the last 3.5 years. Now, I intend to get into exactly what this is, but for right now, we're just going to point out the difference between the two. The tribulation is the last 3.5 years. It's called the Great Tribulation. And the last 7 years is called the 70th week. So, now, let me see here. Okay. This is not really documented, but if you're over in Revelation 13, you'll see that this beast is given power. The first beast is given power. That's Revelation 13:5 for 42 months. And he makes war with the saints and overcomes them. That's Revelation 13:7. Now we've already read in the book of Daniel that he overcomes them for 3.5 weeks. Or a time times, not 3.5 weeks, a time times and a half of time, which is 3.5 years. And so the first part of this is the first 3.5 years. Then he gets power for 42 months. That's the last part of the 70th week, or the last 3.5 years. And it's in this time that this second beast, the one that comes out of the earth, and that's the bottomless pit, his name is Apollyon, and that's ancient Apollo, which is something that is about probably 800 pages back in the book. It has to do with the creature that was worshipped by the Romans, and who indeed put Augustus Caesar in power through the use of the Sibylline books, which is a whole another discussion. What happens here with this power, he causes all the people who are not written in the Lamb's Book of Life, Revelation 13:9, to worship him. And this power gives him power over all kindreds and nations and tongues. Now, if you recall that email that I sent out about a time when there's going to be Islamic caliphates and countries to the north and the east and the south of Israel set up, and who come and cause problems and whatnot with Antichrist, who has taken over in Israel. You'll see that although he may have power over all these people, there are problems. It's not at peace that he has power, because they do have a war, and it's with Antichrist, and that's the time of the end called Armageddon. So, now I'll say this: if you look into it, you can look back and see books people write about what it means about the second return of Israel, and they look at it as if that there is no second return. That's the church, and it's figurative and yada yada. It seems that these guys have this idea that because they do not know what Bible prophecy is saying, they're allowed to say anything they want to. Seems to be where they're going with it. Don't know. Did somebody get a noise?
Yeah, sorry, that was me. I put that file in there so Bo could download it from Skype that you sent me on the Who is Who and the End Times.
I wondered if everybody was here.
Thanks.
Right.
Okay. What was I saying?
Sorry.
So what you really got to be careful of, there are people out there who are making crap up and passing it off as gospel truth. And some of them are some of the greatest preachers of our time. Homer and Jerry did it. And they're just wrong about some stuff that they got from Schofield. So what you need to do is pretty much sometimes forget everything you think you know about what you know about Bible prophecy and go back and read what the Bible says. And what you will do when you've spent roughly 20 to 25 years at it, you'll understand how I came to write that email that probably printed out in 2 pages or so, and make it all flow together. It takes a long time to get that information out of the Bible, but that's what it says, and that's why I'm quoting for you these quotes. You can save yourself a bunch of time if you care to study it by writing the quote down and what the point is. So, now, the second beast comes out of the abyss, uses his power to cause the people of the earth to set up an image of the first beast, and he actually makes it speak. Now, I've always taken this to mean some sort of a, what do you call, animatronic type thing, Disney-esque thing, only advanced with the ability to make movements and so forth and so on. And
Really? Huh.
but it may just as easily be that this is a melding of the supernatural with the natural, and he actually does cause an image to come to life. If you trace this back to the earliest days of the Bible, does anybody know when the Bible first started to be written? I take that as a no.
That's a no.
The Bible only goes back to the time of the Exodus. It does not go back to some ancient time passed along by ancient tradition. Moses told of these ancient traditions, that's for sure, but he got them as a direct revelation from the Lord, and he wrote down what the Lord said. So that's how we happen to know about those ancient times. They're written by an eyewitness who was obviously there, and who obviously precedes the creation of the earth. Now, one of the things that's come to me recently, and in this business about creationism, you got to understand, we don't know where all the dark matter came from. We don't know what state it was in at the time, but what we do know is before the creation of the earth was without form and void. Tohu wabohu. Now, we don't know what that means. It may mean that it was in a plasma state, matter-wise, but what we do know is the Lord said, "Let there be light." And from that glorious thing known as the Hubble telescope, we can actually see the universe in an incredible display of lights, all of which is powered by a nuclear reaction, so that it means that the sun and the stars are burning out, because that what that is a nuclear reaction, and the amount of energy produced is the mass of the stuff, the energy that's been lit up in the nuclear reaction, times 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. So that's the speed of light, by the way. And so you take that mass times that, and that's how you come up with the energy that's produced in joules, and it is out of sight. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unimaginable, actually. So when you look at the creation of the universe, we don't know how the matter came to be. But we do know that what he did was rearrange the matter to bring it into a state of order from a state of disorder. And that, by the way, is an idea that goes through almost all of ancient traditions about the creation, certainly in Egypt, when Ray brought, or Tim, brought forth it brought forth order, which was Ma'at, which was the wife of Thoth, but it's also what Thoth brought about and kept. It is order of the universe. So it was also in the Roman ideas and the Greek ideas of Zeus and Apollo, and I guess what I'm saying is that this is an old idea that goes back to the beginning of mankind, and certainly the first historical records of mankind, which is maybe 3,000 years, but then again maybe not, because if you ever read the Sumerian king list, you'll find incredible periods of time described therein, and it was written on the idea that everybody was trying to date themselves as the oldest culture on earth. Certainly the Sumerians were doing that, certainly the Egyptians were doing that. So it's just hard to completely understand. What we know is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and then we're laid out with a schedule that tells us basically the chain of events of what happened, but certainly not how it happened. In fact, it's probably impossible for mankind to understand how he caused this stuff to get moved around. Certainly it's beyond my understanding. Okay, back to the end of this story. The end of this kingdom of Antichrist and the supernatural out of the bottomless pit is going to give this guy some real juice. I mean, you see these charlatan preachers out there today, they're preaching. Some of them may have some power. Certainly in the charismatic church, that's what they think. And what I know is I'm not involved in it. And I don't get into it. But I do suspect that from some charlatan in the charismatic church, and this has happened many times before, that this is how the Antichrist is going to get across denominational lines. It's already the only thing that does it today or has ever done it. And I think this guy's going to pull some stuff to pull it off. But that is not a biblical fact. That is my suspicion through an educated guess, or a series of educated guesses. All right. Let me see. I'll tell you what. Let me go through a little more here. I think we're at a stopping place here coming up. And we can talk about then what we need to do to change the format and what I need to do to make this less boring. Because it was fascinating to me when I was studying it, because I was coming up with new revelations and new things. Now all I'm doing is talking down to people, and that's not a good thing. So anyway, let's go through a few more things.
That's fine.
I'm good.
If it's fine with you, it's fine with them.
I don't care.
You stop
Okay.
being so snotty to everybody.
Now,
Go brush your teeth and comb
does
your hair.
everybody recall that I said one of the things you've got to remember in Bible prophecy is that Bible prophecy interprets, it translates and interprets itself.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll give it an example of that. If we take the prophecies that we've just talked about, we've talked about Daniel, and times, and half a time. And we've said we could take those to mean years. Okay? And then we looked at the Revelation and we found out 42 months was a time frame, which is 3.5 years. And then we look at the two witnesses. This time frame is defined as 1200. It's called 42 months, and it's also defined in Revelations 11:3 as the time of their witness is 1260 days. And so for 1260 days, they're going to prophesy from the temple of God. Two important facts here. Where are they going to be? The temple of God. So logic says if they're in the temple of God has got to be rebuilt, just as it's described in roughly Ezekiel 40 and following. It gives a complete layout, the specifications, if you will, for the temple that is to be the millennial temple. Now, why is that fact important? Well, not so eminent a guy as David Kirkland has come to me, and we were talking about this, and he was reading something that said that this shrine that's presently on top of the table of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which is the Dome of the Rock, the Muslim shrine with a gold dome on it. That is the Millennial Temple. And I said, well, I'm sure there's people that say that, but you've got to understand the Millennial Temple, it is clearly described in the book of Ezekiel, and this is not that temple. So I can tell you for a fact, before the second coming, that temple, that Dome of the Rock is coming down, and the temple of the Lord will be rebuilt. How do I know it? Well, we just read it. So there are people that say that the rapture, there's nothing to precede the rapture. Well, actually, that's a crock of BS. It's very clear in the Bible, but these guys have changed it to follow what C.I. Scofield says. And Chucky Schofield is about the same as Chucky Darwin, if you ask me. I'm quite sure he was he was a born-again Christian. But I'm also sure that he got off, he lost his way. Anyway, but what's the second important point besides the temple? We have a definition here of the 3.5 years, the time times and half a time, 42 months, as 1,260 days. So that clearly defines for us that in these prophetic years that's described in this prophecy that we read, they are years of 360 days. So now Anderson, when you read if you read The Coming Prince, or if you do read it, you'll see that Anderson says that
we added 5 days
that
many years ago.
this time
So it makes
frame
this calculating time thing
is a time frame of 3.5 years of 1,260 days, or 360 years. And if you multiply it times 483, which we just put together, we have mathematically 173,880 days. But he just said, because it's prophetic years, he didn't give any reason, and he didn't give any reference as to how he came to that conclusion. We just established it for ourselves, and we did it out of the Bible. So a big difference between what some of these really good expositors are doing is the fact that we are using the Bible to establish our facts. And because the Bible is the Word of God, and we will ultimately prove that, we can easily see that we can put our faith in it, we can trust it, and when we see something in it, we need to take the facts of what we've seen and not what we've been told about those facts. So Anderson was right, but because he didn't establish his basis about the 173,880 days, but because he didn't establish his basis, he came out with the wrong answer. He was off by a year for the coming of Messiah. Now, we're going to see exactly why that's important, and that's coming in the next part of this, if you guys still want to continue doing it. So the other conclusion we can come to out of this is we got two 42-month periods. Okay, one is the time of the power of Antichrist, and the other is the time of the power of the two witnesses. So what we have is, when we see clearly that the end of this two periods of 42 months, the everlasting kingdom is set up. So, what happens? I've lost my way. It's the last 7 years that the earth is in existence. So this has got to be the 70th week. We know the 70th week is 7 years. It's the 70th group of 7 years, and in both the original prophecy of it and in this new revelation of what happens there, we find out the same thing. It is the last 7 years of the earth as we know it today. And this is the time before the coming of the Messiah. So, does everybody understand what I'm getting at here?
Yes.
I'm giving the definition of what this 70th week does. And we've already seen it in Daniel. We've laid out the things. So, I mean, you can see what it is. All right. All right. So that's what I was doing. Okay. If we go back and we look at what we said from the beginning, from the prophecy of Daniel, the people of the prince that shall come will destroy the city of Jerusalem. it's fairly obvious, since the destruction of Babylon had already passed by the time that the prophecy was given to Daniel. The destruction that his prophecy gives has to be the destruction of the city at the hands of the Prince of Rome, and that came in 70 AD. Okay, when the prince that is to come is identified, we see that the prophecy that this Prince of Rome will there's a prophecy that says this Prince of Rome will confirm the covenant with many for a week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice to cease and set up the abomination of desolation. This means the 70th week is split apart into two halves. The last one half when the